wanted to take all the best elements of the books, the ones that we have access to, and really tell the story of Hannibal Lecter in a way that we haven't seen before. The book has been adapted twice, so if we did the same thing, we're assholes. So we have to change it up. We've never seen him as a practicing cannibal and as a practicing psychiatrist, so this is the opportunity to tell that chapter of the story that hasn't been in any of the movies.
I've been covered in blood so many times on this show that the worst that can happen is that it dries and is uncomfortable.
This is network television.
But the whole thing with the horse, when I read it, for the first time maybe, I was like, Brian?
Do you ever find yourself shocked by the fact that you're in season 3 on a network show?
Totally unbelievable, yeah.
We're gonna make the darkest show. We're gonna have no lights on. We're gonna have to pit it. We want people to lean in to the darkness.
And I think he's doing stuff for television that is like transforming it, honestly.
I mean, our season premiere had, snails feasting on a person who was going to then be feasting on the snails, and it's sort of like...
Yeah, it's not like a genre on network TV.
Right.
I felt pretty confident that, at least from my seat in the audience, that I was going to be seeing a show that was going to speak to me and hopefully other like-minded folks.
Eventually, they had to rip the floor of that set up because there had been so much blood so many times that it had gone moldy.
I like the guy with the in the first season who became the angel, sort of suspended in the air with the disgusting back thing happening with the naked people praying at the foot of the bed, because that was the first time that I went, they're f***ing doing this.
I've been into a lot of TV shows, like way into some really great shows, ones that influenced me both creatively and as a human being, but through all that I never really found one I wanted to call my favorite. Subjectively, nothing really hit me in the way that I put it before everything else. Then I started watching Hannibal.
Did you just smell me?
It's easy to get cynical with regard to sequels and reboots and remakes. An original idea is seen as a risk both by investors and by audiences, so when you retread an old idea you get a built-in audience of the risk-averse. Tired ideas get milked, and dead horses get beaten, and new ideas struggle to get funded. But sometimes you can take an old idea and give it new context and new life. You can return to an old universe with a sizable budget and new technologies. If your vision is clear enough, and if you're committed enough, you can take an iconic character, a character from a film that won Best Picture and did as much as Psycho did to legitimize horror with both critics and with mainstream audiences, and you can do something really incredible with him and his world. Brian Fuller was Hannibal's showrunner.
I went to school to become a psychiatrist, and it wasn't until a teacher told me, go to film school, because
Really?
everything that I did was about
We thank our Lord every day. For 2 reasons.
Was because it got canceled after 3 seasons. He referred to his show as a reality-adjacent purple opera, where cinema and emotion trump reality. Something over the top you just kind of have to either go with or not.
And I tell every director that comes into Hannibal, you are not making television, you are making a pretentious art film.
It's storytelling with emotional logic as opposed to plot logic, with emphasis on visual poetry.
You're not meant to really look it through and go, this couldn't actually happen.
Right. I mean, it can feel sometimes on first glance like just a series of non sequiturs.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's so pretentious.
Which is challenging.
Dialogue is so over the top.
You and I, we still itch.
Nobody talks like that.
If you're interested in that kind of heightened, as opposed to something naturalistic and kitchen sinky, this is as good as it gets, I think.
The show has to be as elegant and eloquent as the title character.
He wanted to do something different with the character. Quote, keeping his European mystique from the literature, but with sobriety and taking away the wink.
I keep on going back to some of the more iconic things and trying to sew those into our series. I've always described the writing staff as mashup DJs. We're spinning tracks from Red Dragon with lyrics from Silence of the Lambs and trying to create our own Harisian Hannibal tale.
On top of the Harris novels themselves, Fuller drew inspiration from many sources.
I mean, there's the references inside the references inside the references.
Sometimes taking more lighthearted ideas and giving them a gruesome edge. The human mural in Hannibal was inspired by Buzzley Berkeley musicals. Fuller said, it's all those images, those high angles, top shots of bodies intertwined with elaborate choreography, but we just did it with corpses. He also cited Jeepers Creepers as an influence on that scene too. Other scenes draw from films like The Third Man.
So I wanted a big Third Man epic chase sequence.
Or The Haunting.
We talked a lot about Robert Wise's direction in The Haunting, which was black and white and widescreen, and so much of the horror in that was sound design, and all these meticulous widescreen frames.
And small flourishes like character names can come from unexpected places. Gillian Anderson's character, in all her elegance, takes her first name from Creepshow. Fuller was also showrunner on Pushing Daisies, and he and Scott Nemurfro thought it would be fun to take a Pushing Daisies quote-unquote murder tableau and reinvent it for Hannibal with a much darker tone, talking about a juxtaposition of life from the two different shows. Hannibal's entire aesthetic and tone are about juxtaposition between the beautiful and the grotesque, transformation of, quote, dark inspirations into beautiful images, and vice versa.
His imagery, his horrific, elegant, poetic, operatic imagery is stunning. It's absolutely stunning and horrifying and disturbing and strangely attractive and alluring and appealing. It's bananas.
It's looking at the horrible through Hannibal's eyes, and he sees beauty in everything, so we have to present horror in the manner that our title character sees it.
There is beauty in horrible things in life. There are these gorgeous, deformed flowers, and you look at them and you see a thing of beauty, and then you stop and go like, oh shit, that could happen to your human body. And it's terrifying. But there is beauty in the most terrifying things in life.
So we're never just glossing over these horrible images. Like, we get these horrible tableaus, but then we actually delve into the psychology of why they are happening.
It's so heightened that you want to do justice to that, to the poetry of it, but you want to give it some kind of grounding in, you know, psychological realism.
What I think is so brilliant about Jim's cinematography is that he paints on velvet. Like the blacks are all velvety black, and so it really is a show that is all about the contrast of darkness and light, which he got the psychology of the show, and I think that's why the aesthetic is so powerful, is that it really represents that conflict between dark and light in Will Graham's heart.
Fuller directly cites David Cronenberg, Stanley Kubrick, Brian De Palma, David Lynch, and the Tony Scott film The Hunger as influences. Fuller also talked about anime influencing the show, and despite trying very hard to figure out what anime he was referring to, including going as far as to tweet the stupid video I made at him,
Hannibal, American television, influenced by anime.
Anime is a huge influence.
I came up empty. Fuller praises the elegance of Kubrick and Lynch, while Cronenberg brought the body dysmorphia, especially in the earlier episodes that were more procedural focused. Fuller said, "It's always shocking to see the body transformed into something other than the vehicle for our minds, which is disturbing and disorienting and makes you question your being and how you function." Sonia Saraya and Todd Vanderwerf in the AV Club expanded on this, saying that a creepy but fascinating aspect to Hannibal is how grotesque but beautiful organic matter becomes. The show seems to indicate that we ourselves, our biological processes, our shape and smell, are fascinating and repulsive, like poking a dead slug with a stick. Fuller talks about how seeing beautiful scenes with amazing looking food calls you to reevaluate everything you're exposed to when you realize the food is people, and has called Hannibal a show with kind of an animal-loving agenda, where they often do to people what people are very comfortable with doing to animals without a second thought.
So we have to confuse the audience with something that looks absolutely delicious, and you stop and think, oh god, it's people.
And he expressed the idea that people should think more about what they put in their bodies, whether it is nutritionally or philosophically. Fuller calls The Hunger a pretentious art film beautifully told, a wonderfully decadent exploration of a European couple up to no good that was a tremendous influence, especially on season 3 of the show. He says the symphony of abstract images intercut to tell a story that he saw in that film made his brain go bonkers when he was 13 or 14. And the criticisms at the time were that it was style over substance. And he was like, I'm getting plenty of substance. I don't know what you're getting. I love cinematic poetry. I love juxtaposition of imagery. I would say the same thing about Hannibal that Fuller said about The Hunger. Dialogue that felt weird or clunky to me when I first watched the show seems much smoother on rewatch. Probably because I accepted that I was watching a beautiful, deliberate, gallows humor nightmare rather than something attempting any sort of realism. I'd recommend watching Hannibal and any media like it with that mindset. Fuller calls Hannibal a work of heightened fiction, as opposed to documenting horrible things that happen every day in the world, which he had no interest in doing.
But I think if it wasn't so surreal and if it also wasn't as funny as it often is, I think it would be an unbearable show to watch. I think that's why it works.
I think operatic is a great word. I mean, that's the kind of elevated. I mean, the colors and the just visuals are so stunning, and there's music throughout that it feels elevated without feeling silly or anything like that.
The show starts off as a murder a week procedural, sometimes subversion of procedurals, elevated by visuals, and becomes what Fuller calls an umbrella under which they tell a story between Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham, Graham being the show's main character, an FBI profiler whose ability to empathize with killers helps him identify and catch them. Of the show's structure, Fuller has said, when we got to the second season, we were picked up more for its fan base and critical acclaim, and so there was a greater leniency and trust in how we were going to tell the story, and that the third season, in a broader sense, jettisoned the traditional crime procedural storytelling element entirely.
Because so often when we were breaking those stories, it was like, okay, now a body has to drop, and what's the metaphor of the death tableau? And it was a spine to a lot of the storytelling, and when we jerked that spine out of the body, like the Predator, it was...
We were totally freed from that, weekly crime of the week, whatever you want to call it, that more procedural element, and Brian was able to write in a much more free-form kind of way, and as a result was able to explore that kind of looping, circular nature of grief and trauma.
Even from the beginning, he had, quote, never seen Hannibal as a crime story as much as he did a romantic horror story. In Salon, Soraya wrote that what really makes Hannibal a horror show is the torture Hannibal inflicts on Will's mind, the commingling of violence and affection, of love and disinterested murder, as we watch his respect and admiration for his friend become his permission and enablement of a monster. BBC's Sherlock is an apt comparison, being that these are two shows based on culturally ubiquitous source material being adapted by experienced showrunners. They deviate in that Sherlock's showrunners seem to have contempt for their fans who they manipulate with queerbaiting, as in playing with the idea of characters being queer just to entice viewers, without ever actually letting those relationships happen. Basically constantly undercutting them with no homos and I'm not gay.
I am not gay.
While Hannibal's showrunner and cast come across as kinder and more accommodating, and have a show with characters that are actually legitimately queer. There's a scene in season 3 of Sherlock where two characters are trying to solve a big mystery. I won't spoil what it is. And as you watch the scene, you kind of realize that they're representative of the show's audience. The show has a really big pull with the Tumblr crowd, so let's make fun of them with a goth girl who has conspiracy theories about the characters. And she thinks that Sherlock and Moriarty kissed.
What? Are you out of your mind?
That is so funny. This loser thinks that the men in our show are gay.
I am not gay.
Why would anyone think that?
Take my hand. Now people will definitely talk.
I don't mind.
Where would anyone get that idea?
You jealous?
We're not a couple.
Yes, you are.
It's in stark contrast with Brian Fuller, who has talked about queer representation as a responsibility and as a difficulty. Or Hugh Dancy, who, even when speaking of Hannibal and Will's love strictly in platonic or romantic terms rather than sexual, has spoken on concerns of avoiding queerbaiting or of approaching queer material as a joke.
If people want everything that the show engenders to be made literal, I think they're going to be disappointed. The show is about romance, and it is about love between the two of them. I mean, profound and inescapable love.
They are in love, or they love each other.
Yeah.
That's unquestionable.
Yeah.
I think it's a platonic love, but it's rich. And
What we're not trying to do is be teasing or something. I mean, we're playing, when we get these scenes from Brian, talk about Mads and myself, trying to understand what beneath that kind of dense poetic writing, to kind of find what the emotional undercurrent is, because that's the key to understanding Brian's writing and doing justice to it. And then understanding what is the current particularly of the two of them in that given moment. But what we're not trying to do is it would be really funny if we gaze at each other meaningfully, and that'll really kind of throw everybody watching the show. That's right. Not the point, you know.
Have you read this last fiction with Jimmy Bright and Brian Zeller?
I think you guys write that slash fiction.
Yeah, it's not fiction. I don't understand this fiction that everyone's talking about.
Do you welcome the fan fictions? I know some shows are a little, not upset, but a bit spooked by the stuff they read when it involves characters.
I am not gay.
In essence, I think the whole television show is fan fiction, because we are all adamant. What's good for the gander is good for the goose.
It is, I think, relatable to that community who are also fan fiction writers and storytellers. So I respect when they twist it around in really interesting ways and have very strange illustrations of Maz and Hugh often chewing each other's penises off. And it's like, well, God bless them.
Often.
I get it. I get the passion that other worlds that we can escape to inspire in us, and I think it's very spiritual and connective, and that's the thing that's so interesting and new now about Twitter, is that you have this immediate interaction and this connection to like-minded folk. You know, I feel like I'm a fan amongst fans because I just had the opportunity to sort of do something with my fandom, and I see online everybody's doing something with their fandom, and I think it's wonderful.
Fuller, And Todd Holland, also gay, created the show Wonderfalls. And Fuller has talked about how he and Holland felt a responsibility to have gay characters on the shows they create, and how they managed to sneak a lesbian kiss past standards and practices despite being expressly forbidden from showing one, on the same network that had shown them before. Fuller said, when you see two women kissing on shows like Fastlane, it's fun, it's exploitative, and it's like, ooh, hot chick on chick action. And it's to get the straight guys to watch. When you're talking about two adult women in a serious relationship that is genuine and tender, I think it scares them, because you're trying to say that gay people are normal. When it's played as a joke, it's easier for them to digest than when it's actually real. Fuller and Holland experienced pushback just for showing gay people as normal and human on the same network that was happy to exploit them. Fuller also created Dead Like Me.
In Dead Like Me, the dad was...
Yes, I remember. In the pilot episode, he was in a relationship with a younger student who was a man.
Right, and hugged him at the funeral, and
the hug that lasted a little too long.
Yes, exactly. Then, of course, I went on to do Wonderfalls, and then Dead Like Me, the character became straight.
On the character being switched from gay to straight after his departure, Fuller says it was something he did not appreciate and frankly thought was really shitty. On the evolving relationship between Will and Hannibal on this show, he says, I hope that it wouldn't be interpreted as pandering, and he wanted it to read as an authentic, logical extension of everything that preceded. It's worth mentioning that Sherlock co-creator Mark Gatiss is also openly gay, and that while sexuality isn't necessarily some kind of litmus test for politics, our concern, our respect for diversity, and that I don't want to put that kind of responsibility on someone just because of their orientation, rather, I think it's something important to consider for all showrunners regardless. Hannibal just happens to be one of those shows that raises the bar. Fuller said, it's also a point of view that Todd and I share. We can write about Sharon's perspective of being gay because I know what it feels like. It's not a point of view that you see often on TV, so it feels a little fresh, a little less trodden, and just opens the door on storytelling. Fuller said about the character of Margot Verger that, in the novel, she's a very masculine character who has had years of steroid abuse and is a lesbian. And it was unclear to me in the novel whether she was either transgender or a lesbian as a result of those horrible abuses in that horrible childhood. That's not how being trans or being gay work, though, and Fuller said that he didn't want to contribute to that misconception of what it is to be transgender or a gay woman. Fuller recognizes his responsibility there as someone who makes TV shows that millions of people see. There's a kind of insincere faux diversity that you see sometimes in media, a shallow appeal to progressive sensibilities that is, in reality, just stereotypes that have been rebranded. With Fuller and with Hannibal, you see a sincere push for representation of women and of people of color and of queer people, rather than something shallow and pandering, and a desire to explore stories that are typically ignored at best and othered and treated with confusion or even contempt at worst. Raphael Bob Wasberg, the showrunner of BoJack Horseman, was asked on his Tumblr by an anonymous fan about animal sight gags on his show, specifically about a character who's a crocodile who wears Crocs. Bob Wasberg answered the question, then he used it as an opportunity to talk about something much broader. The fan had referred to the crocodile in the scene as he, when the character is actually female. Bob Wasberg talked about getting into arguments with his character designer, Lisa Hannibal, when she would make background characters or characters who are part of minor sight gags female, and about how through that he came to a realization about how ubiquitous maleness is in media and how he could in some small way help dismantle it. To quote Bob Wasberg, the audience will think, why are those characters female? Is that part of the joke? The underlying assumption there is that the default mode for any character is male, so to make the characters female is an additional detail on top of that. In case I'm not being 100% clear, this thinking is stupid and wrong and self-perpetuating unless you actively work against it, and I'm proud to say I mostly don't think this way anymore. He said this kind of thing is everywhere, that the baseline is male. The average person is male. You see this all over, but it's weirdly prevalent in children's entertainment. Why are almost all of the Muppets dudes, except for Miss Piggy, who is a parody of femininity? Why do all of the Despicable Me minions, genderless blobs, have boy names? I love the story, which I read on Wikipedia, that when the director of The Brave Little Toaster cast a woman to play the toaster, one of the guys on the crew was so mad that he stormed out of the room, because he thought the toaster was a man.
Toaster's a girl.
I was telling her that I actually had one person on the crew slam the door and walk out when I said that I had hired a woman to play the lead role.
A toaster. The character is a toaster. I try to think about that when writing new characters. Is there anything inherently gendered about what this character is doing? Or is it a toaster? As Fuller laid out Hannibal, he must have seen that there was nothing inherently white about Jack Crawford, nothing inherently male about Bloom and Lowndes, and nothing inherently straight about, well, a lot of characters.
I think if we didn't change some of the genders of the characters, it'd be a sausage party. Like it would just be, there'd be a lot of guys.
And I really applaud Brian for making some of these masculine characters feminine on our show.
I find writing for women to be no less complicated than writing for men because I just look at them as individuals.
Fuller has talked in interviews about how he might have wanted to make Clarice Starling black if the show hadn't been canceled and if he'd been able to get the rights from MGM. About exploring growing up black in the southern US on top of having access to the source material's already rich, complex character.
I love Ellen Page. I think she would be a great Clarice.
But I also love the idea of casting somebody who's not white in that role, and having race play a factor in Clarice's background in a way that race plays a factor in everybody's background.
When speaking on the influence of David Lynch, Fuller also directly references queerness. He says, "I think David Lynch has a very queer tone, not necessarily in sexuality, but in terms of celebration of the other as point of view." Fuller defines Lynchian queerness as an openness to that which is different. Rather than treating his fans with contempt the way the Sherlock showrunners have, he's very in tune with fan culture because he himself grew up as an alienated nerd who found a sense of belonging in media. He then emulated that same media in his own work and actively tries both to facilitate a relationship with people his work connects to and does his best to keep it from alienating them, something a lot of showrunners don't stop to think about because they haven't been othered in the same way Fuller was growing up. Sherlock bothers me at times, but not nearly as much as the show NBC shared Hannibal with, Law & Order Special Victims Unit. Hannibal introduced me to the actor Raul Esparza.
I love playing the part because he's a total douchebag.
And when I found out he had been added as a regular SVU cast member, I decided to watch a couple of episodes as an adult after seeing it here and there growing up. Here's Fuller in an Entertainment Weekly piece called "Hannibal Showrunner Criticizes TV's Rape Scene Epidemic." A character gets raped is a very easy story to pitch for a drama, and it comes with a stable of tropes that are infrequently elevated dramatically or emotionally. I find that it's not necessarily thought through in the more common crime procedurals. You're reduced to using shorthand, and I don't think that there can be a shorthand for that violation. It's an incredibly personal and intimate betrayal of something that should be so positive and healthy. He said that all of the structural elements of how we tell stories on crime procedurals narrow the bandwidth for the efficacy of exploring what it is to go through that experience.
Other crime procedural shows where women are frequently raped and murdered, and that's something I don't want to do on this show. I find it really difficult to derive any sort of entertainment from rape.
Right.
I think it's hard for me to make that entertainment, whereas if you flay somebody's back and turn them into an angel or
that's entertaining?
It is outside of reality. So, and I have this...
It happens less than rape, I guess.
Yes.
The line that we established early on is that we don't want to rape women. With the murders, I can sort of fantasize in terms of a heightened quality of like, oh, a totem pole of people, that's so cool and weird. It's you're looking at a piece of art as opposed to thinking about the brutality of it. But that's something that I can't get inspired by. It's too dark.
It would have been really sad for the only female characters to have been victims,
We have a mix of women and men dying, and we're very conscious in the writer's room of like, okay, we just killed a woman, we have to kill a guy now.
On top of being the very definition of exploitative,
what did they do to you? They leveled up.
SVU is shot in a way that is so boring to watch, with so little care or thought put into it. It's all flat and uninspired shot-reverse shot that barely services the narrative with a lot of awkward cuts and obvious ADR. Like, see if you can guess where they re-recorded Jeffrey Tambor in this scene.
There were all kinds of suspects. But isn't it true that in New York, black males between the ages of 14 and 35...
Matthew Zoller Seitz and Chris Wade put together a great video essay that was published in Vulture called "What Does Cinematic TV Really Mean?"
Once Soderbergh has made the decision to focus on a certain character, he doesn't get any footage except to communicate that idea. If you watch a lot of TV, you realize how unusual this is. It makes producers and network bosses nervous because it changes the shape and feel of a scene in a way that is striking and often irreversible.
The essay references Hannibal because Fuller's vision for Hannibal fits directly into their framework of making TV cinematic, namely making deliberate artistic choices rather than just shooting coverage, or what Matthew Zoller Seitz refers to as housekeeping.
I don't want to see standard coverage. I don't want to see dirty overs. I don't want to see if you shake that camera, I will fucking stabilize it in post.
I really love Breaking Bad, but I am definitely on board with the criticism that there is an element to that show that glorifies abuse and criminality, and that white middle-aged criminal badass man who is a horrible jerk but we think he's a badass anyway is an overused trope in American TV. Dexter is an even worse offender in that it takes murder and makes it palatable and safe and fun for a mainstream audience to enjoy because Dexter only murders bad people. Murder is good now. To me, this cheapens something very real in a way that further deadens us as a culture to violence and misses the opportunity to explore violence and a relationship to it in a more affecting way. I mean, I can enjoy on-screen violence as much as anyone else, really probably more than most people, but I think what's even more valuable and memorable is an examination of that violence and why we enjoy it. This being Why Man Bites Dog is one of my favorite films, and a film that is unwatchably brutal for some people. Soraya, in her piece, Stunning Bloody Hannibal challenges our senses of beauty and revulsion, so that if it's hard to watch, well, that's the point. And that the title character is so absurdly all-powerful and coolly destructive that he is less a character than the physical embodiment of murder. In an interview conducted by Vanderwerf, Fuller calls Hannibal an agent of ill will in the world who is fascinated by man's capacity for sin, making him a pretty far cry from Walter White or Dexter Morgan. In Hannibal is Horror, from Craig Hildebrand-Burke, he said that what becomes apparent as we watch the show is that Hannibal moves beyond horror as a visceral experience of entertainment and instead pushes us towards a conscious engagement with the horror that we tolerate. We have a blindness to violence because we have domesticated it. It is house-trained. We invited it in. And that wanton, horrific, consequence-free violence has been residing in our televisions for decades. In this sense, TV is the perfect medium for horror. It is also the most horrific medium for dealing with our responsibility towards violence. Watching bad things happen to bad people feels good. We have relished in death on television for too long, and now we must pay the price. This show is our purgatory for every exploited death served up as entertainment. Hannibal wants us to engage in our behavior, to accept some part of ourselves that we don't really want to know, and that it wants us to realize that we love being entertained by death, but don't really want to consider the reality of death.
Did you really feel so bad because killing him felt so good?
Rather than making murder fun, or the abuse Hannibal inflicts on Will and others fun, or watching Will experience the murders he's trying to solve as the murderer fun, the show finds the emotional truth and beauty inherent in these terrible things without pretending they're not terrible. Characters who survive an encounter with them bear literal scars thanks to Hannibal, physical and visual manifestations of their mental torment.
I imagine there's going to be some sort of disfigurement.
Oh, I've asked for the
Chilton
full
now.
Cronenberg.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to go to Ed Harris, History of Violence, white eyes and scars. Or maybe I'll change my mind. I don't know.
Despite the undeniable strength of Hannibal and Will's connection and the stunning visual quality of the murder tableaus, we're never allowed to forget what's really going on, leading to a powerful commingling of disgust and awe. This brings me to my favorite reading of Hannibal ever, and one that helped me appreciate the show even further than I already had. Todd Vanderwerf's Hannibal returns the fear of death to the TV crime drama. Vanderwerf referred to Hannibal as a series that restores the seriousness of purpose to a genre long in need of it, a show that earns its realism in its emotional context, where deaths matter, how in the midst of life we are in death, and how the show reminds us of this eventuality through gore and murder. He said, Hannibal is a great show for other reasons. It's incredibly beautiful, and fond of long passages of wordless storytelling wherein it has the confidence to let its visuals carry the story, and when the characters open their mouths, the dialogue they speak is often unexpectedly amusing or melancholic or profound, but the thread uniting all of it is this fascination with death. Death is often too facile on television, a thing that happens to a guest character so the regulars can swoop in and save the day. Fuller, however, has been obsessed with death as long as he's been making television, and he's funneled that sensibility into a series that has every reason to be a cheap cash-in and has, instead, turned into one of TV's best shows. In the world of Hannibal, death isn't a thing that happens because of glibly smirking psychopaths, or because a woman was dressed too provocatively, or because of Edgar Allan Poe. In the world of Hannibal, death is a moth, eating away at the edges of a beautiful tapestry, until the picture is so eroded that all that remains is a suggestion of what might have been. I talked to my Hot Fuzz video about being drawn to creators who really care about what they're doing and who value fanatic engagement over broad appeal. Hannibal always struggled with ratings and ultimately failed to make it past the third season, but with the people it caught and resonated with, it resonated deeply.
So I think there's always an appetite in the general public for the bizarre, the strange, the macabre. I think it's part of human nature.
I'm not saying that the show is perfect or that Fuller is perfect. I also know that there were changes made and tropes used in the show that upset a lot of people, and while I don't necessarily agree 100% with these assessments, I can absolutely see where they were coming from, and it would be disingenuous to ignore them and pretend my beloved little weird murder husband show was the ultimate paragon of progressivism and diversity. I also have no idea what Fuller would plan to do with Buffalo Bill, all things considered. Still, it's something that is so important to me. It's a show that fearlessly explores a lot of what other media refuses to touch. It's a show about death, real death, and about abuse, about being drawn to something that could kill you, and it doesn't use the cheap exploitative imagery we become deadened to explore these things. I have ravenously consumed horror media since I was in elementary school. I've been going to conventions and cosplaying since I was a teenager. I used to write fanfiction, and I still draw fan art. I'm making a career out of video essays because I learned how to edit at around 15 years old because I wanted to be able to say anime and movie clips to music, and through that I learned that I love editing. Fandom has shaped my life in a lot of ways. And I have always been weird. I have always been an erotic person with a morbid sense of humor who gets really into media, and experiencing a lot of death in my life just furthered that. It is not an affectation. It wasn't out of some desire to be special or different. It was something inherent to my personality, and something that helped me connect with media I saw it in and people who felt similarly when I felt alienated. Which I did. A lot. Part of me used to be scared and embarrassed, and this only further contributed to my alienation. I mean, I didn't really hide being a massive nerd the way some people do, but I still felt a kind of shame about it. At some point, I snapped, and I stopped caring what people thought about me, and I became so much happier and so much more confident and so much more myself. Around that same time, I cut my hair off and stopped wearing skirts and dresses and embraced parts of myself I had kept hidden and buried. In The Philosophy of Horror, Noel Carroll described a theory of horror, which he in part derived from Mary Douglas's piece Purity and Danger, that across whatever culture, that which violates that culture's boundaries or exists within that culture's boundaries, that which he called categorically interstitial, is treated with fear and contempt. He says, things that are interstitial, that cross the boundaries of the deep categories of a culture's conceptual scheme, are impure. And he applies this to horror in that monsters are typically beings or creatures that specialize in formlessness, incompleteness, categorical interstitiality, and categorical contradictoriness. You can see this with tales of creatures that are neither alive nor dead, neither animate nor inanimate, neither human nor animal. This contempt also manifests parallel and in a much more serious way in real life for people who don't fit neatly into established cultural categories. So you get mistrust of, and violence toward, people who aren't entirely masculine or entirely feminine, or people who don't fit into rigidly defined racial categories or categories of gender or sexuality. A pretty good litmus test for a piece of media, or for a person, is how it or they treats someone or something that doesn't fit into rigid, pre-established boundaries, with contempt and reactionary violence, or with at least an attempt at understanding. I'm not looking for some kind of Burger King Kids Club feel-good bubble in my media, and I don't need or expect all of the media I consume to cater to my personal ideology. Part of media diversity is being exposed to a variety of ideas. I'm just saying that in my day-to-day life, I am more than used to feeling alienated, not only because I am a woman, but also because I'm a woman who isn't very feminine, a woman who isn't 100% straight, whatever. Someone who fails a lot of tests of categorical purity. And when I would turn to nerd stuff that I loved and was obsessed with growing up, I would see people like me, if they were there at all, being raped and murdered or mocked as dangerous or grotesque. Both in my day-to-day life and in the media I used to use to escape from that life, I was an other. For me, Hannibal is a departure from that, and it's a profound departure in that Fuller speaks explicitly on growing up as an other and eventually embracing it, turning that alienation into a kind of community, and purposefully using his power as a showrunner to create things that help keep people like him from feeling alienated.
I love Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks felt very queer in a way. Everything about the small town life was other and outside, and I grew up in a very small town in the Pacific Northwest, so Twin Peaks for me was very influential. Something very relatable, just being a Pacific Northwest kid, other in a small town, trying to find an identity for myself that I didn't really necessarily see around me.
On Fans of the Show, he said, I feel like we're peers, and there is a mutual respect, and that everybody is coming from a place of admiration for the source material, myself included. It's been a fun, sharing experience with the audience. I think there's often a negative associated with being passionate or geeky about entertainment, but for me, entertainment has always been a greater psychological escape, so I think it's unfortunate when others don't appreciate the depth of passion entertainment offers. And it isn't just that. Brian Fuller as a showrunner and Hannibal as a show are not afraid to cross cultural boundaries. They live in the boundaries and thrive on juxtaposition.
Crossing boundaries is different than violating them.
Boundaries will always be subject to negotiation.
It's a celebration rather than a condemnation of the other. And as an other myself, I think that's pretty cool. On the unexpectedly large percentage of the show's viewership made up of young women, Fuller said, they really responded to this show and I typically relate to young, bright ladies. It was nice to see how enthusiastic and passionate they were, and also happy in the face of the dark material. They found joy and hope in something that is arguably quite bleak. I found that really rewarding, and as somebody who is a fan of many things myself, I appreciate and relate to being enthusiastic about a show you love. I think it's wonderful.
So it was really neat to see how inspired and inspirational the audience was. It was great.
I think coming into, it was either the first season or the second season, convention hall, and seeing how many young women were in the audience, and that delighted me to no end, to have a relationship with a fan community that was young people who were very intelligent, very articulate, very open to new and weird things, and being able to champion them as individuals as they have championed the show. That was a pretty great moment.
Because what I love about Comic-Con is that it is a place where others gather. So, you know, as somebody who's always sort of identified as other and has sort of like an other point of view, it's great to see so many others here together and celebrating their passion. And it's such a wonderful place that people don't have to curb their enthusiasm in any way. It's letting their flags fly, and I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to express that.
Hannibal has given me hope about what TV is capable of, both stylistically and in terms of content, and it's made me feel less alone. The only way I really knew how to repay that was to spend a very long time putting together a meticulously researched and constructed video essay about what, to me, is so great about it, to try to get more people to experience it. So, there you go. One last Fuller quote to close on. I was doing the commentary on some of the early episodes in the season today, and I was so proud of what we accomplished. I was so proud of the actors, I was so proud of the writers and the directors and the team that produced this show, because it doesn't look like anything else on television, it's weird as and I'm incredibly proud of that. Hey, so here are a couple of Hannibal fan videos I really like. Spoilers in them, though. More spoilers than in my video. I got the idea for a lot of this video's background music from one of them, too. Links to everything I referenced in this video, as far as interviews, academic essays, articles, stuff like that, are in the description. If you enjoyed this, please consider donating to my Patreon. If you want to learn more about movies or video games, check out my other video essays. Thanks for watching.
If you've seen it, what you think about the Korean television promos?
They're
if you have anything to do with them,
amazing.
because they're incredible.
They're amazing. Have you guys seen those?
Oh yeah, I watched it on repeat.
I would like to see more twinkling from you in the second season, if possible. If you could do that.
And didn't they at one point morph onto like a pop star or something? Brilliant.